Welcome to Nocturnal Nightmares TV, where the shadows come alive and the fear never sleeps. Tonight, we dive into the chilling unknown with 5 spine-tingling tales that will make you question reality. From whispering windows to vengeful dolls and shadows that reach out from under your bed, these stories are guaranteed to keep you awake. So brace yourself for terror, because once you enter this nightmare, there's no turning back. The Whispering Window. The clock blinked at 2:59 a.m. Almost time. Jack pulled the blanket tighter around himself and stared at the window. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., the whispers began. Faint at first, like the wind, but they grew louder until it felt like someone was right there, right next to his bed. Jack's parents didn't believe him. They said it was just the sound of the wind blowing through the cracked window in his room. But Jack knew better. The wind didn't whisper names. It didn't call to him. The clock turned to 3 a.m. And there it was, a faint voice. Jack. He shuddered, burying his face in the pillow. But the whisper came again, closer this time. Jack, come closer. He peeked from under the blanket. The curtains were swaying even though the window was shut tight. Slowly, Jack climbed out of bed, tiptoeing toward the window, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper grew louder, more urgent. Jack, I'm waiting. He reached for the curtain, fingers trembling. With a deep breath, he pulled it back. Nothing, just the dark, foggy night outside. His own reflection stared back at him from the glass. Relief flooded through him. Maybe it was just his imagination after all. But just as he turned to go back to bed, his eyes caught something, a movement in the reflection. His reflection was smiling. Frozen in terror, Jack watched as his reflection slowly raised its hand, pointing to the crack in the window. Before he could react, a single eye appeared in the crack, staring back at him. It wasn't his own. The eye blinked, and suddenly a face emerged from the crack, pressed against the glass. It was pale and distorted, with sunken cheeks and a twisted grin. Jack stumbled backward, mouth agape, as the figure pushed its way through the crack, its long, bony fingers clawing at the window. I've been waiting for you, Jack, the figure whispered, its voice rasping and hollow. Now it's time to play. The window shattered as the figure burst through, shards of glass raining down. Jack screamed, scrambling to the door, but the figure was faster. It pounced on him, pinning him to the ground, its icy hands wrapped around his throat. No one can hear you, Jack, it hissed, its breath reeking of decay. No one can save you. Jack thrashed and struggled, but the figure's grip was unyielding. As his vision began to fade, he caught a glimpse of the twisted, inhuman face above him, grinning with triumph. The doll's revenge. Lily stared at the old porcelain doll sitting on her shelf. It was a gift from her grandmother, passed down through generations, but there was something about its glassy eyes that unsettled her. Every night, she'd place it on the farthest end of her shelf, making sure its lifeless gaze wasn't pointed toward her bed. But every morning, the doll was closer. First, it moved an inch or two, then a foot. By the 3rd morning, it was right next to her pillow. She told her parents, but they laughed it off, saying she was probably just moving it in her sleep. That night, Lily put the doll back on the shelf. She even placed a heavy book in front of it, just to be sure. But at 2 a.m., she woke up to the sound of something shuffling. She froze, not daring to move, her heart racing. Slowly, she turned her head. The doll was sitting at the foot of her bed, its head tilted, staring right at her. Lily screamed, throwing the covers over her head. She heard the sound of tiny feet hitting the floor. The doll was moving. She could hear it shuffling closer and closer. Lily, came a soft, scratchy voice. I just want to play. The footsteps stopped right next to her bed. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, praying it was all a bad dream. But then she felt it. Cold porcelain fingers brushed against her cheek. Lily's eyes snapped open and she gasped in horror. The doll was inches from her face, its glass eyes gleaming with malice. Slowly, it raised its hand, the fingers curling into a fist. Time to play, Lily, it whispered, and brought the fist down hard on her forehead. Lily cried out in pain, blood trickling down her face. The doll struck her again and again, its movements jerky and unnatural. Lily tried to fight back, but the doll was too fast, too strong. Stop, she pleaded, but the doll only laughed, a shrill, grating sound. Never, it screeched, and sank its porcelain teeth into Lily's arm. Lily screamed, the sound echoing through the room as the doll continued its relentless attack. She knew then that no one could save her from this twisted, living nightmare. The Watcher in the closet. "Someone's in my closet," whispered Timmy, clutching his blanket tightly. His mother sighed, brushing it off as a childhood fear. She kissed him goodnight, turned off the lights, and left the room. But Timmy knew better. Every night, when the lights went out, the door to his closet creaked open just a sliver. And every night, a shadowy figure stood there, watching him. Tonight was no different. As soon as the lights went off, the door slowly opened. Timmy squeezed his eyes shut, trying to ignore it, but he couldn't help it. His curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The figure was closer tonight. It stood just inside the doorway, tall and thin, its face hidden in shadow. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. Timmy pulled the blanket over his head, trembling. He tried to tell himself it wasn't real, that it was just his imagination. But then, he heard the creak of the floorboards. It was moving, closer. Right next to his bed. He didn't dare peek again, but he felt the cold breath on his face and the low whisper, "I'm watching you." Timmy's heart raced as he heard of the figure's footsteps circling his bed. He could feel its presence looming over him, its unseen gaze burning into him. He wanted to scream, to call for his parents, but the words caught in his throat. Suddenly, the figure spoke again, its voice eerily calm and soft. "You know, Timmy, I've been watching you for a very long time. I've seen your fears, your dreams, your deepest secrets, and now it's time for you to be a part of mine." The figure's hand reached out, and Timmy felt a cold, bony finger trace the outline of his face. He shuddered, his entire body paralyzed with terror. "Don't be afraid, Timmy," the figure whispered. "This is going to be fun." Timmy squeezed his eyes shut, praying it would all just go away. But the figure's icy touch lingered, a cruel promise of the horrors to come. The shadows under the bed. "Don't leave your feet hanging over the bed at night," his mother always warned. "The shadows will grab you." Ben didn't believe in such silly stories. He was too old for that now. But tonight, for some reason, the words echoed in his mind as he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. A storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the sky. Each time the room lit up, shadows danced across the walls, long and thin. Ben felt uneasy, but he told himself it was just the wind playing tricks on him. His foot dangled over the edge of the bed, and he smirked, daring the shadows to grab him. Thunder roared, and the wind howled. Ben closed his eyes, trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, he felt it, something cold and bony wrapped around his ankle. His eyes snapped open. He kicked his leg, but the grip tightened, pulling him toward the edge of the bed. Panicking, Ben scrambled to grab the sheets, but whatever was under the bed was too strong. His body was being dragged off, inch by inch, his heart pounding in his chest. He kicked and screamed, but no sound came out. Just as he was about to be pulled under, the lightning flashed again. In that brief moment, he saw them. Long, twisted shadows, their bony fingers wrapped around his leg, pulling him into the darkness. Ben fought with all his might, but the shadows were relentless. They yanked him off the bed, his head slamming against the floor. Dazed, he watched in horror as the shadows began to coalesce, forming a grotesque humanoid figure. It loomed over him, its featureless face turned toward him. Ben tried to scream, but the shadows wrapped around his throat, cutting off his air. The creature leaned in, its cold, skeletal hands grasping his face. "You should have listened to your mother," it hissed, its voice like the creak of old bones. "Now, you're ours." Ben felt the shadows envelop him, dragging him deeper into the darkness beneath the bed, his cries muffled and his struggles growing weaker with each passing moment. As the last of the light faded, he knew that no one would ever find him again. The night mirror. Sarah found the mirror in the attic. It was covered in dust, but its frame was intricately carved, with strange symbols she didn't recognize. She thought it was beautiful, so she brought it down and hung it in her room. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she noticed something strange. Her reflection wasn't moving the same way she was. When she brushed her hair, the reflection smiled, only she wasn't smiling. Sarah blinked, shaking her head. It had to be a trick of the light. She finished getting ready and turned off the lights, but in the darkness, the reflection kept moving. Sarah stood frozen by the bed, watching in horror as her reflection stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass. Its smile widened, too wide, stretching unnaturally across its face. Then, it whispered, "I'm coming out." The glass started to crack, lines spreading across the mirror like a spiderweb. Sarah backed away, heart pounding, as the reflection's hand reached through the crack, clawing at the air. The last thing she saw before she bolted out of the room was her reflection grinning, stepping through the shattered glass into her room. Sarah ran down the hallway, her heart racing. She could hear the sound of glass crunching behind her as the reflection gave chase. Desperate, she flung open the bathroom door and slammed it shut, locking it. She pressed her back against the door, panting, listening for any sign of movement. But the house was silent, save for the pounding of her own heartbeat. Slowly, Sarah turned around, only to come face to face with her own reflection in the bathroom mirror. But this time it wasn't her own face staring back. It was the twisted, grinning visage of the thing that had escaped the mirror. "Hello, Sarah?" it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "Did you really think you could escape me?" The mirror shattered, and Sarah screamed as the reflection's hands reached out, clawing at her, its sharp nails drawing blood. She stumbled backward, tripping over the toilet as the reflection stepped through the broken glass, its form shifting and contorting. "I'll never let you go," it whispered, its voice echoing through the small bathroom. "You're mine now." Sarah closed her eyes, praying for a miracle, but she knew deep down that there was no escape from this hellish nightmare.